Wait. Yeah, okay. Hello. And there we go. Hello, ladybugs and gingerbreads. And it is just turned 7:01 here in California time. And I am here. My name's Tad Williams. If you've never tuned in before, you happy in your ignorance person. And I am going to be here to read, to continue to read, because that's what I've been doing. So who's here? Jared's here. Hello, Jared. Hi, Kenneth. Emily. Hi. Kelly. Hi. Cliff. Hello. Nancy. Hi. Good to see ya. Jerry, with your pal Danny. Say hi to Danny for me too. Well, I'll do it. Hi, Danny. What's happening? Ron. Hello, Ron. And Carl and Mike. Hello, gentlemen. Both of you. Mahmoud. Greg. Hi, Greg. Yes. You're planning to go to sleep, but stayed a little bit longer to stay. Hi, Mahmoud. Well, thank you very much. Lovely to see you, however briefly. Callie or Kaylee, I'm not sure which. Feel free to advise me. Hello, good to see you. Harmony, Barban, and Mahmoud's cat, who says Mao, and Medardo. Buenos días, Medardo. Mucho gusto. Kevin, hi, Kevin. And, oh, sí, Prospero Año Nuevo a usted también. And Rook, hi, Rook. And Angie, and Dora, and Jamie, hi. Oh, a couple of new, or not, if not new, less frequent visitors. I don't know what to call it. Doesn't matter. It is the January time, which means that we have passed the New Year time, or at least the specific day of the New Year. And there, my camera's gone out of focus again for no good reason. I have no idea why that is. Hello, see this? Okay, follow it back. Watch me. You're getting sleepy. No, that didn't work. Oh well. It'll come back. It always does. I still don't know why it does that, but of course it isn't a super expensive camera. Callie. Callie says. Callie as in going back to Cali. Yes. All right, good. Well, just make sure you've got your gin and juice lined up. And eventually I will get my focus back. The Sunday thing is not that different from the early Sunday morning thing. I trying to think. I didn't have much news for anybody this week just because we've had a very boring week. We had one of those super boring. Oh, hello, Andrea. We had one of those super boring New Year's, which, to be honest with you, it wasn't just the pandemic. We've been having boring New Year's for years and years, and part of that is because Deborah is on a completely different schedule than the rest of us. Certainly has been than my schedule for so long. Hello, Monique. And Deb tends to get up really early in the morning and go to bed fairly early in the evening, sometimes as early as like 8:30 or 8:45, other times, a bit closer to the rest of us. But as a result, I have not seen New Year's in with Deborah since probably we last went to a New Year's Eve party, which, would have been sometime in the early 2000s, middle 2000s, I don't know. but it's been a while. We don't expect to do a big New Year's shindig, so surprise, we didn't. Although the kids and I did kind of convene at a certain point. Okay, here, Mahmoud, I'm trying it. Oh, but it doesn't want to not see. Still no. I don't know. It's a weird, probably inexpensive camera, and maybe at some point I'll have to get another one. But as long as you can hear my voice, you're probably better off not being able to see every line and blotch on my aging face. It's bad enough to be behind it. But, now I have to sit in front of it as well, which is really terrifying. Anyway, hi, Tim. Happy New Year to you, too. So, like I said, we didn't really do much. We kind of convened briefly. As I mentioned last night, the family has this ancient joke that the children, the kids, they aren't children anymore. God, the youngest one is 21 now. But the kids developed in early infancy, practically, almost as soon as they could talk, which was, that right after everybody says, Happy New Year, they like fall to the floor and they lie there on the floor groaning, oh God, oh, and you run over and go, what's wrong? And they say, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten since last year. So of course we had to do that because that's, something you do every year. And we basically then everybody kind of parted and went their ways. I mean, we don't have a huge house, but at least everybody has a room and a door to close. So, everybody kind of went out. The kids were watching, I don't know, they're probably watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia or something, or, some other, or, some play through on some game or something, all that stuff that they do. So that's basically it. There's not a lot to tell. As far as I know, my family are all still well, although I haven't talked to any of them in a few days, but I figure somebody would have called me up and said, Mom and Dad exploded, or, your brother has woven himself a chrysalis and he's in the process of turning into another species, or, any news would be news. There hasn't been any of that, so I'm hoping and assuming that everybody's well. Kelly says, did you put your money out? I don't know that tradition. Is this a trick? Do you want me to put money outside my door or something, and then someone is going to come by and swoop it up? I don't know that particular tradition. As I said, we almost never have a functional New Year's. So we have no traditions, except, as I said, for my children. The children have one. And so there we are. Really, literally, there's just nothing much to talk about this week. I'm working on various things. I'm back working on the short novel, Brothers of the Wind, because I've finally gotten all my feedback in on that. And I figure in the next week or 2 weeks that I will get that. If not, I'll get that finished, I think. And so that's where we are. I'm just doing all that stuff. And meanwhile, of course, I am reading to you guys. And we're about halfway through War of the Flowers. And, okay, hang on. I'm just reading Kelly's message here. Put $1 outside overnight, New Year's Eve, and you're supposed to have money all year. Okay. Well, that would the only true English person, although our biological kids are both half English, obviously. But the only true English person is Deborah, and she's always asleep at New Year's Eve, so she'd have to think of that early in the evening. Dang, well, no wonder we're going to be broke again. I'm glad at least there's a reason for it. If I had just put that money out, then we would be we'd be rolling in it this year. But no, I failed. That may also be why my web camera keeps doing weird things. Whoops. Okay, don't mind me. Sorry if I'm sliding around here and it looks like the last tragic moments on the Titanic. I was just trying to see if I could get the web camera to focus. See, it can focus up close pretty good. And then as I get further back, it just kind of loses its brain for a moment. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, like I said, count it as a blessing. You don't have to face the face that I have to face when I shave. And all right, so we're going to read from the War of the Flowers. For those who did not get to tune in last night and have not yet caught up, or whatever, I mean, there's no assignment or anything. Theo is in Daffodil House. He has just gotten back, and he has found out the shocking fact that, according to Cumber, the Farisher, who is Lady Amelia of Daffodil House's assistant in the science portion of her work, Cumber, who had an embarrassing moment of political freakout at the discotheque where they went, where Theo saw Poppy Thornapple again, et cetera, et cetera. But Cumber has come to Theo during a power blackout, and which are apparently fairly frequent in Fairy, and told Theo that biologically, at least by their standards, he is not a human. He is a fairy. Although they also suggest that no his actual fairy parents are not likely to acknowledge that fact. So anyway, that's where we are. And then Theo is hanging out with Applecore, who told him, I didn't know either. I didn't know anything about it. And they have sort of established that as much of a pain in the butt as Theo is sometimes, Applecore is still rather fond of him as a friend, and that's why she didn't desert him. And also because she doesn't trust the big, important fairies. And then just at the end of that segment, a voice, a Hob voice in his ear told him that he was commanded to the audience chamber to meet Lord Daffodil. So that's where we are. Excuse me. It's not cocaine, it's just dog hair. Because every time I fall asleep, I wake up with a dog, augured into my armpit, or sometimes lying on my head. And I took a nap earlier, and I'm still snorting out dog dander. Anyway, no, I don't do hard drugs, kids. I do not. So here we go. The War of the Flowers, continuing. The Daffodil House audience chamber... fix that angle. The Daffodil House audience chamber seemed to take up a large part of the main tower's 26th floor. It certainly had its own very large lobby. After a brief inspection, Theo was waved toward the door by the creature sitting behind the desk, which, Theo decided, since it was almost 7 feet tall and had a tusked, wrinkled face a bit like a warthog's, was probably more security than secretary. But it took one look at Applecore and shook its misshapen head. Not on the list. She's with me, Theo said with what he hoped was an admirable determination. The appointment beast looked at him with something that might have been amusement in its tiny red-rimmed eyes, except amusement seldom looked so much like the urge to chew off someone's face. Ooh, it said, very chivalrous. The sprite wants to stay out here anyway. Now, how many pieces of you am I sending in to see the boss? 1 or more? It's not worth arguing, Theo, Applecore said. He's just a pig with a little too much authority. You cut me right to the tenderloin, girlie. The beast turned his malevolent eyes back on Theo. Are you going in? I'll meet you here, Applecore said. You'll find me just far enough away from the desk that the air conditioning starts to take the edge off this fellow's breath. The warthog thing chuckled in appreciation as Theo stepped past him. He wished he could feel so cheerful. The fact that the door was whispering like an idiot beggar didn't help. Clean as a bean, it fluted as he walked through, its childlike voice suddenly quite loud. Clean as a bean. 1 nymph binding. Strange clothes. No weapons. Clean as a bean. The audience chamber, which had sounded as though it should be all tapestries and stained glass windows, was instead a large and extremely modern room. One entire wall, a floor-to-ceiling window with a magnificent view of the corner of the Daffodil compound that contained the conference center building, and also of the city beyond. The window glass, if it was glass, seemed to bend the light in an odd way. 3 figures were waiting for him, still as statues. Lady Amelia sat between 2 male fairies, one light, one dark. He wondered how long they'd all been sitting in silence. Did they talk with their minds or something? He seemed to remember Applecore saying something like that about the flower families. Creepy. Hold on, if I'm one, could I do that too? Or is it too late for me? That would be typical Theo Vilmos luck, of course, to have all the disadvantages of being non-human with none of the benefits. Lady Amelia stood up, smiling graciously, if a bit perfunctorily. She was wearing a sort of suit made out of a rough, pale fabric. Something that, like a complimentary bathrobe from a five-star hotel, managed to look both simple and extremely expensive. Good Maybon to you, Theo Vilmos. It is kind of you to join us. I hope the power outage didn't inconvenience you too much. There's such a problem for us these days. She indicated the dark-haired man. This is our honored guest, Lord Hollyhock. Theo was a little startled. The Hollyhocks were the family who had commissioned Tansy to get Theo to the city in the first place. So this must be some blood relative of the guy who'd ended up a mummified heart in Tansy's silver box. But in all the excitement since then, he'd almost forgotten about them. The fairy lord didn't look much like he'd suffered any major losses lately. He wore a beautiful, slightly shimmery suit and was handsome in a long-boned way, as so many were here, but he seemed small by flower fairy standards. Hollyhock wore rimless spectacles, but otherwise had a face that Theo thought belonged in a Renaissance painting, as if he should be standing beside the throne, smirking at Columbus, while the poor fellow tried to talk Isabella and Ferdinand into loaning him some ships. He surprised Theo by smiling at him in a way that was almost nice. Master Vilmos, we meet at last. And this is your host, said Lady Amelia, Lord Daffodil. Theo's first thought was that the fellow's name should be Lord Dandelion instead. He was tall by anyone's standards, with a great mane of hair that stood out in all directions, a handsome, heavy-jawed face, and a closely trimmed beard that was little more than pale stubble. His sand-colored, unstructured suit was impeccably casual. His white-streaked hair was sand-colored too. Of all the flower folk Theo had seen, he was the only one who actually looked like he was past the prime of adulthood. Theo suspected that meant he was very, very old indeed. To look at, he might have been a vigorous 60, the kind of man who'd buy your business, fire you, and then steal your girlfriend as well and take her away on his yacht. You have been treated well, I trust? Lord Daffodil's tone suggested he could think of 1,000 things that were more important. It was hard not to get on his knees to this impressive personage and genuflect. Harder still not to say something that was at least politely reassuring, since it was obviously no more than a courtesy inquiry. But Theo was beginning to think that whatever his own actual heritage might turn out to be, his mortal world approach to things was of some use here. Well, the roof didn't leak in my room or anything, but I haven't exactly been showered with information. Lord Daffodil allowed one brow to climb just the exact distance to connote slightly amused disdain. A piece of precision engineering that Theo could not help admiring. He wondered if the master of Daffodil House had some goblin woman pluck and shape those impressive eyebrows. You feel you have been tricked in some way, that we have taken advantage? I feel that there are things going on here that concern me, but I'm the last to know about them. Lady Amelia, he said abruptly, I've just been told that your tests prove I'm not really mortal, that I have fairy blood. Is that true? She smiled. It was a sympathetic one, ever so slightly sad. Damn, Theo thought, can't you ever catch these people off balance? You must have talked to young Cumber. I was told he had a bit too much to drink last night. I am fond of the lad. I've known him since he was born, and his mother is very dear to me, but despite the advantage of his schooling, he has failed to learn much discretion. Begging your ladyship's pardon, Theo said, but fuck discretion. Is it true? Do I have fairy blood? Lord Daffodil stirred, but Lady Amelia only offered another regretful smile and nodded. Yes, yes, you are one of us. One of you? Does that mean I'm a daffodil? The master of the house let out a snort. By the shattered cathedral, you certainly are not. There are no missing children in our house. Please, said Lady Amelia, forgive my brother. He does not mean to be rude, but we do take good care of our offspring, unlike some of the other houses. You have met my son Cyrus, I'm told. Does he seem like the child of a house that could lose a baby and not care? He seems like the child of a house that gives him too much money and too little responsibility, Theo thought, but didn't say. He knew that kind of parenting wasn't confined to fairyland. Fine, so then where do I come from? We don't know, Master Vilmos, said Lord Hollyhock. What we do know is that certain of the other leading houses have been watching you for a long time. That something recently happened, or is happening, that has made their interest more personal and more intrusive. Let us say a source of ours with access to those houses made it clear that they were about to change the arrangement, to do something more than simply observe you. He was watching Theo carefully, perhaps to see how closely he was following what was being said. At that point, we decided to step in. Do you know much about what is going on here? About our factions? Enough to know that it's confusing, but yeah, creepers, chokeweeds, that stuff. Everybody fighting over whether to kick the mortals in the ass or not, it's been explained to me. Hollyhock allowed himself a small grin. I would have enjoyed hearing that explanation. So, if you know something of that, you will understand, perhaps, why we didn't feel we could allow our adversaries simply to do whatever they wanted, and why we became a bit curious about you. I still don't understand. Why me? These are, the hellebores and thorn apples we're talking about, right? What could they possibly need me for? We don't know, Hollyhock admitted. But no doubt they will be very upset to learn that you are with us. You're going to tell them? He is cursedly full of questions, said Lord Daffodil. Whatever his true nature, his mortal upbringing quickly comes to the fore. He didn't sound like he thought that was a good thing. Hang on, I thought you were one of the families who liked mortals. Daffodil stared at him as if from a great height, which was actually more or less the case. We symbiotes don't feel that the mortals should be destroyed, but that the two races must find a way to coexist. That is hardly the same thing as liking them. Theo sat back in his chair, weary and depressed. He might not be a human being, but he felt like one and thought like one. It wasn't much fun constantly being told how much everyone hated his kind around here. So, excuse the mortal rudeness, but I still want to know why you are going to tell these people who want to kill me that I'm here. They don't actually seem to want to kill you, said Hollyhock, who at least seemed able to talk to Theo as though they were both of the same species. That's part of the puzzle. We want to know why they've been chasing you just as much as you do. We're hoping that when they find you're here, they'll think we do know, and they'll either give up their plan or give it away. So, mine shaft parakeet, or whatever that bird is, that's me. Be honest, that's what you mean, right? Let's find out if I'm really important by seeing if they try to kill me again. Even if they wanted to kill you, Lord Daffodil said, they would not dare. Not as long as you're under my protection. That could bring about another flower war, and nobody wants that. Not even the most hot-headed of the excisers, like Hellebore. Theo looked out of the window. Beyond the walls of Daffodil House, the city stretched out as far as he could see, except for the great dark expanse of Ys, the lake or ocean or whatever it was, full of boats that looked like silver clipper ships. The worst of the clouds had rolled through, and the skies had turned a clear, if muted, blue. Theo realized for the first time that although he'd seen modern trains and automobiles here, he'd seen no sign of airplanes. Was that because some of these people could fly by themselves? But the wealthiest, most powerful group had no wings, so that theory didn't hold. Could it have something to do with the way the topography changed, the thing with the train stations and all that? He was about to ask about it when Lord Hollyhock suddenly said, "This has been very difficult for you, Master Vilmos, hasn't it?" He turned in surprise, assuming he was being mocked, but if the fairy lord was insincere, he hid it well. "Yes," said Theo. "Yes, to tell the truth, it has. Dragged right out of my life into a world I didn't know existed, chased by monsters and a bunch of other imaginary creatures. Imaginary to me, anyway. No offense. And now I'm told that I'm not actually a human at all, that my parents weren't my parents. Yeah, it's been a bit tough. Please believe that we were not to blame for most of those things," said Hollyhock, "that we have indeed tried to help you. Yeah, I know. I may be pissed off, but I'm also grateful, especially for Applecore. She saved my life." A memory suddenly returned. "That thing that first came after me in my world. Do you know about that?" "The undead thing?" asked Daffodil. "Doesn't make any sense, that. Why would Hellebore and that lot send something like that after him?" "Perhaps because it could go after him in his own world, where they thought we wouldn't discover what was going on," said Lady Amelia. "Yes, Master Vilmos, we know about it." "Well, Count Tansy said that the thing was going to keep coming after me. I don't know when it's going to show up again, but I do know that next time I may not have a convenient magic door to jump through. Tansy said you guys might be able to, I don't know, get that thing off my scent. Did he mention that?" "I haven't spoken to Tansy in days," said Hollyhock, "but I was furious that he sent you to the city without a proper escort. My nephew, Dalian, was supposed to accompany you, but he was murdered on Mistletoe Green the day before you were to be brought from your world to ours. I suspect Hellebore's people. It has the smell of something of theirs, the careful cruelty." "They cut out his heart," said Theo. Hollyhock looked at him sharply. "How do you know that? Only the family saw the body and knew what was done to him." "I saw the heart. They sent it to Tansy in a silver box. I think it had, like, your house crest on it or something." The dark-haired fairy lord shook his head. "It was sent to Tansy? Tansy has the heart? Why? It makes no sense." Theo could only shrug. "Enough of this," said Daffodil. "These are small matters. The crime against you is terrible, Malthus, but I do not believe Lord Hellebore himself had anything to do with it. There are factions in his household and allied houses, some of them quite wild." Lady Amelia deftly cut in. "Whatever the case, it is time to move on to other matters. Think of the Summit Conference. It begins this afternoon." Summit Conference? Theo had almost entirely forgotten what Cumber had told him the night before, but it was coming back. "Yes, a meeting of the 6 families," said Lady Amelia, "where we will find out what the Hellebores and Thornapples think about you being our guest. They will be here, along with Lords Foxglove and Lily and their retinues, in a very short time." Hang on a second. Theo suddenly had extremely damp palms. "You're telling me that the people who tried to kill me or capture me or whatever are coming here to Daffodil House today?" "We have asked for an exigent gathering, yes. There wasn't time to arrange use of another site because of the holiday," said Lady Amelia. "Parliament is out of session, and Lord Monkswood said he couldn't possibly provide sufficient security there on such short notice." What is he asking?" demanded Lord Daffodil. "You, Vilmos, do you think you should have some say about when the 6 families, the Masters of the realm should meet with each other? I think I should have some say about when I get trotted out for a bunch of people who seem to want me dead, and certainly want to see my friends and family back home wiped out. Yes, I goddamn well do. Perhaps it need not be that way, Master Vilmos, said Hollyhock. Lady Jonquil, do we need to involve him in a face-to-face confrontation? No, probably not. She turned to Theo. I will make an arrangement so you can watch the proceedings without having to be physically present. Would that satisfy you? She said it nicely, but still managed to sound like she was soothing a child's tantrum. Theo, however, was not going to be drawn into the fairy nobility's stilted manners and old-world behavior. Yeah, maybe, if it's safe. Does the fool creature think someone is going to assault him in my house? Growled Lord Daffodil. For a fairy, he had turned a rather choleric shade of beige pink. Nonsense! Lord Hollyhock turned to Theo. I would like a little conversation with you before the meeting, Master Vilmos. Have you had lunch? No? Then perhaps you will join me for a meal in the chambers Lord Daffodil and Lady Jonquil have been kind enough to provide me. Let my hosts and I just finish discussing a few things here. Would you wait for me outside? Theo nodded and stood. He still had a lot of unanswered questions, and so far the Hollyhock fellow was the only person who'd shown any signs of being willing to talk. As he walked out, they fell silent behind him. He caught a reflection of them in the floor-to-ceiling window and saw that they were all staring at each other. Talking, it looked like, maybe even arguing, but without moving their mouths or making a sound. The outer room seemed to be empty, except for the warthog thing sitting behind the desk. Applecore? Theo called. She went out, said the tusked creature. She saw something on my security eyes. He gestured to the row of framed mirrors on the desktop. Theo leaned over to look. Each one appeared to contain a view of some part of the compound or the surrounding streets. She's quite a sweet little nutcracker, that one, the warthog said. Not exactly the sugar plum variety, but I like a little spice myself. His overfilled mouth pursed for a moment and his brow furrowed. Listen, can I ask you a question? Don't want to cause no offense. Are the two of you, are you two an item? What is this? Theo growled. Why do people keep asking me that? Doesn't the fact that she's the size of a candy bar and I'm about 100 times bigger than her tell you anything? The warthog's tiny eyes opened wide. Say, where are you from? Must be the farthest island in East or something. The Hogboon docks for sure. Haven't you ever heard of cosmetic surgery? Cosmetic? You mean... It was too bizarre. He didn't want to waste any more brain power on the ins and outs of this cartoon world. Look, did she say when she was coming back? No. She just said to tell you she thought she'd seen someone you knew, and she was checking it out. Someone she knew, it must have been. The secretary shook his bristly head. I know my job, pal. She said find someone you knew. She even said the name. Rufus or Findus or something. Theo thought for a moment. Rufinus? But it couldn't have been him. He's dead. Then she was probably wrong. The creature settled back and crossed one broad, pant-stretching thigh over the other. But she's still pretty cute. Sassy, too, the way I like 'em. Theo was still trying to figure out what Applecore might have been talking about when Lord Hollyhock appeared and led him away to lunch. Chapter 23, The Shadow on the Tower. The well-dressed brownie who brought lunch was so swiftly efficient that every time Theo saw him, the brownie was in another part of the room, arranging the rolling tray, setting out drinks, adjusting the lighting and the blinds on the window with such nimbleness that it was hard to believe Hollyhock had sent his secretary and the rest of his staff away. The room seemed to be filled with other people. The last time Theo looked up, the dapper little fellow had vanished. Theo hadn't even heard the door open or close. "I'm glad you joined me," said Hollyhock, leaning forward to peruse the tray. Outside the audience chamber, he was almost informal. "Have some of the melon. It's only in season for another week or so." He speared a piece with long, two-tined fork. With the fruit in his mouth, he waved the fork in a strange little pattern. Immediately, the air in the room felt closer, tighter. "Just a small discretion charm," Hollyhock explained. "I'm certain our hosts respect my privacy, but too much trust of even one's allies is not a healthy idea in these sad times." He smiled, but his eyes were intent. I said I was displeased with Tansy for having sent you unescorted. I am also unhappy that the Daffodil Clan have been so slapdash in their care of you." They took me in off the street," Theo said. "They have given you no guidance, no warnings, nothing. It's regrettable, but the city is not a safe place these days for almost anyone, and certainly not for you. I heard that Lady Amelia's son took you to a club right inside Hellebore House. Is that true?" When Theo nodded, he scowled. "Criminal! Like putting your purse down on the sidewalks of Goblin Town and expecting it to be there when you return. You seem to have been incredibly lucky. Perhaps a little too lucky." He lifted his fork again, held it up as though it were a baton, and he were about to conduct Theo in an aria from Madame Butterfly. "Do you mind?" "Mind what?" "If I give you a brief inspection." He saw the puzzled way Theo was looking at the fruit fork. It's silver, you see. A good conductor. Not a perfect item, but good enough to save me going through my belongings to find my wand." When Theo did not object, Lord Hollyhock closed his eyes and began to move the fork in lazy circles. 3 different times he stopped and extended his free hand to snap up something invisible, as though he were catching mosquitoes. "Just as I suspected," Hollyhock said when he had finished. "You were covered with them. But, to our fortune, they are all of the minor variety. I doubt it's anything deeper at work than the usual run of security policy at Hellebore House. They sprinkle them on everyone. You have a few on you from the Daisy Commune as well, but they are days old and inert." Theo suddenly felt itchy all over. "Some what? Covered with what?" "Charms, I suppose you'd call them, although they're a bit more manufactured than what that word generally connotes. Since you haven't any background in our sciences, as far as I know, it's a bit difficult to explain. Tiny surveillance devices." "Bugs," Hollyhock smiled. "No, not living creatures at all. As I said, it's hard to explain." "Oh, for God's sakes, I know what a surveillance device is." Theo took a breath. He didn't want to offend this man. "That's what we call things like that back in my world. Bugs." A chill tightened his skin. "Hang on, you mean I've been wearing those things? That the people at Hellebore House not only know exactly where I am, they've been listening to me?" Hollyhock shook his head like a kind father. "No, son, you can never go down the drain in the bath." "I very much doubt it. These are minor charms manufactured to attach themselves indiscriminately to anyone from outside Hellebore House who steps into their compound. Most of them aren't even working. Disabled by Daffodil House's own counter-charms when you return, no doubt. The 3 I've just destroyed have been sending something back, but it couldn't have been much since they were badly damaged by Daffodil defenses. These are common practices in the city." He set the fork down. "But it is evidence that this is all not being taken seriously enough. Tansy, Daffodil, even Lady Amelia, though she's sharper than most of them, are all treating this like it's a bit of interfamily espionage over who will win the trooping banner at the Old Hill Day Games." Theo had been picking his way without much appetite through the fruit, bread, and cheese, although the melon was as good as advertised, with a curious, minty, perfumed taste. In fact, everything on the tray was exotic and wonderful, but any urge to eat had now left him for good. "What exactly is this?" he asked. "I keep hearing about a flower war. Everybody says there's not going to be one. No one would dare start one, blah, blah, blah. That sounds to me like a divorce or somebody dying. Whenever people talk that much about how something's not going to happen, it's usually because they're scared to death it will happen." "Your mortal background does you credit," Hollyhock said. "You see more than many in this city. Yes, I agree. I think they are all being foolishly optimistic, but I think that secretly they know it. It is a common cliché to say that no one wants a flower war. But the fact is that there have been 3 of them, just in recent history, one of them a very short time ago, and for much the same reasons, as far as I can tell. Major disagreements among the ruling families." "But what does it have to do with me?" Theo rubbed his face. He was beginning to feel the lack of sleep. It was getting harder to ignore the dull throb in his head from too much to drink the night before. "Yeah, it's crazy. I suspect it has something to do with the rumors I've heard. The truly chilling rumors. They say that the hellebores have raised a terrible child." Theo shook his head. I don't get it. They got a bad kid?" No, a terrible child is not an ordinary child, not by any stretch. It is a thing, in a sense, the product of a very old and now shunned science from an earlier era. A child who is not born of women in the normal way, although I do not know much more about the process than that. It is a thing you only hear about in old stories, so if Hellebore has managed it, he has managed something significant, however evil. Evil? A terrible child is a sort of living invocation, if what I understand about it is true, a gateway to the old night. Old night. I have a feeling that's another one that means something really unpleasant. It is the primordial crawling chaos out of which all order arose. It can only be restrained, not destroyed. The fact that the Fairy Lord could say such a thing as though he were talking about the weather was what frightened Theo most. I'm stuck in a world where things like that are the plain truth. Magic is real here, even black magic, and I don't know shit about anything. It has retreated now and touches the world only in a few shadowy spots, Hollyhock explained. But out of those places, few places, dreadful things erupt. Madness and murder. To unleash Old Night in all its power would mean an entire era of blood and savagery and delusion, the twisting of everything known into its worst possible configurations. Theo wished he hadn't eaten. He had a sour, nauseating taste in his mouth. He lifted the crystal goblet of water that the Fairy Lord had poured for him and drank like a man in the desert. "It sounds horrible," he said at last, "but I still don't know what it has to do with me. Besides, why would these hellebores want to do something like that anyway? I saw their place. They're rich and powerful. If they ruin Fairy, they'll be ruining themselves too, won't they?" He took another drink. Hollyhock showed a grim smile. "I have no idea what any of it might have to do with you, except that the coincidence seems too great to be ignored. But as to why the hellebores would do such a thing, you have misunderstood me. They do not mean to unleash Old Night here. It is your world that they would plunge into an epoch of torment, or at least what was your world. The world of mortals." It took Theo a while to finish, coughing and wheezing. As he dabbed at his wet shirt front with the napkins Hollyhock handed to him, he tried to make sense of it. You're saying that these crazy bastards, the hellebores and thornapples, that they're planning to destroy my entire world?" He had absorbed the idea that apple core's chokeweeds, excisors, as they seem to like to call themselves, bore a grudge against humans and even might want them wiped out, but he had put it in the category of some kind of terrorist cell, the source of occasional acts of violence, perhaps, but not of an actual plan for total genocide. Unleashing Old Night would not destroy it so much as transform it out of all recognition, said Hollyhock. But the results would still be horrible. But why do they want to do something like that? I suspect it has something to do with power. You experienced the outage we had last night, I assume, or did you sleep through it? Power? Not political power, but you mean like electricity? Hollyhock looked puzzled for a moment, then nodded. Oh, of course, that is the science of your world, isn't it? Here, that word describes a discredited superstition of half a millennium past. Yes, the power that runs our society, lights our buildings, warms our rooms, and moves our vehicles. These outages, blackouts, as some call them, have been getting more frequent and more serious. It is no coincidence, Master Vilmos, that the fiercest excisor families are those that own the machineries of power production. For some reason, perhaps due to our rapid expansion and the growing demand, perhaps because of something more peculiar and less obvious, our science, and particularly those families, are having trouble meeting the power needs of our civilization. What is known about the problem is that there is a connection between the growth of what your world calls technology there and the shortages here. That advances in scientific progress in the mortal world somehow cause setbacks here that are growing increasingly painful. Many people feel that your world and ours make a closed system, that we need your ignorance to keep ourselves strong. If so, this is a bad time in Fairy in more than one way. Humanity is slowly abandoning its old beliefs, the beliefs that give power to our world, at the very same time that our civilization is exponentially expanding its need for that power. The reference to the ignorance of mortals, even from this unusually well-disposed fairy, rankled a little, but it also reminded Theo of the deeper paradox that had been gnawing at him all day. They keep saying you and your people, but that's the point, isn't it? I'm not immortal at all, unless everyone here is lying to me. And that must have something to do with why I'm in the middle of this. But he had been raised to think of himself that way, and a lifetime's worth of self-image could not change in an instant. Might not ever change. So how can I understand why these excisors might want me when I can't think like they do? I'm trying to follow all this, he said aloud. Really trying. You think that somehow they want to bring on this dark night thing, and then people, mortal people, will be like plunged back into the Middle Ages and get superstitious all over again? Make it easy for you fairies to draw power from us? Old Night. Perhaps that is what they want, yes. I confess I cannot see all sides of the figure. It is a strange, complex plan, whatever it is, and one that has been years in the making, but it is the only thing that makes sense of what has happened. And that somehow they need this terrible child, and me, too? Again, perhaps. Hollyhock sighed. I am certain of only one thing. Our opponents will not be contented merely to argue about it in the Parliament of Blooms in the ordinary way, or even at today's summit conference, as Daffodil and the other old guard seem to think. Neither will they be bluffed into giving up. Hellebore is a man of action. He relies on others to waste their time talking, while he plunges ahead. Theo had momentarily forgotten the conference. Now the idea that the masters of the Hellebore and Thornapple families were going to be right here in this place made him feel nakedly vulnerable. He stared at the rain-spotted window. A series of drops joined together formed a vertical stream. When they reached a small leaf stuck to the pane, they did not push it out of the way, but flowed around it. What was it Dolly Ogre called me? He thought. Shallow, like that rainwater. Just going with the flow, sliding away, changing direction, whatever's easiest. Is that what cat meant too? Now here he sat, the world's shallowest man, in an utterly strange place, with his very life at stake among these coldly selfish fairy folk. He resolved to do better than he had done in the past. He also resolved, for once, to keep a resolution. What about you? Theo asked suddenly. Why are you so different? How do I know you don't have your own agenda? Good question. Lord Hollyhock toyed with a piece of bread. The answer is I do have my own agenda, of course. But I am one of the few whose agenda coincides with yours, Master Vilmos. Why is that? And why should I take your word for it? I can only answer the second question by saying you shouldn't, but I'm afraid I can't offer you any proof. As to what we have in common, other than our basic essence, well, I am not really one of the old guard, although my family is a powerful one. My mother and father died during the last flower war, so I have that reason to fear and distrust conflict between the families. Also, I am a radical of sorts, at least by comparison to most of the other house lords. I do not believe we can trust the old patterns to hold things together, or that tradition is still the most important force in our society. We are a long-lived people, and thus slow to change, but we do change. We must. And our society has not really been stable since the king and queen died. Well, I suppose that will mean little to you, but it's true. Hellebore is another radical, but his ideas only benefit Nidris Hellebore, and people like him. A very small part of our folk. Not to mention what he would do to countless innocent mortals against whom I have no grudge. Theo's concentration had snagged on the idea of the death of the king and queen, which he had read about in his great-uncle's book. That it had been their passing which had forced, or was it allowed, the 7 ruling families to take power in the first place. Whichever the case, it was all becoming a bit too much, too many facts, too many confusing new ideas. And no matter what his blood might say, his mind still told him that he was a mortal. He was far more concerned with protecting his own skin, whatever its genetic heritage, than continuing a crash course on the royalty of fairy. One more question, he said to Hollyhock. Were you the one who wanted me here, in fairy? And if that's true, why did you have Tansy do it instead of just doing it yourself? Hollyhock made a graceful gesture of surrender. I drive the others mad, because when I believe something is important, I treat it that way. So, yes, if pushing and pushing until Daffodil and Lily and the others gave in and agreed to have you brought here from your world means I am responsible, then the blame is mine. He smiled a little. I hope in the long run you will have cause to thank me rather than hate me, but the future is still churning in the well. We could have brought you directly here, to this very house, if we had chosen, but such an expenditure of power and of such a singular and unusual focus would have drawn attention, especially when we knew you were already being observed by Hellebore and his allies. Tansy is one of the few men outside the city who has the skills to effect a thing such as this. His experiments are well known, but even the most suspicious of the ruling families consider him a largely harmless eccentric. He does not dabble much in real politics, although he talks about it a great deal. And so I thought if he were the one to contact you and attempt to bring you through, it might go unnoticed. He frowned. Apparently I was wrong. In any case, I put a little pressure on him through his cousin, Lord Daisy, and he finally agreed. But not with everything he wanted. Certainly he did not fulfill his charge with the care I would have desired. Imagine sending only a sprite after you. She did pretty well, Theo said. No, she did damn well. In any case, Tansy began to be fearful when he heard about my nephew Dalian's death. Hollyhock's frown returned. I still don't understand why they sent his heart to the Daisy clan. But whatever the case, he was in a panic and wanted to back out of the whole thing. It required Daffodil and Lily and some of the others exerting the full weight of their authority to get him to agree to keep his bargain with us. Theo sat back. He finally understood the change in Tansy's demeanor from irritation and what seemed like disinterest at first to an almost fawning kindness. It didn't explain everything, though. So, he said after long silent seconds, what's going to happen today? How do I really know Lord Dandelion and his pals won't sell me out to Hellebore? They sure don't think much of me. Lord Dandelion, he grinned. That is amusingly apt. I will remember that for the parliamentary follies. Such a happy, ordinary thing should occur this year. As far as them somehow betraying you, don't worry too much, Master Vilmos. I may be a young troublemaker as far as they're concerned, but I head one of the ruling families and am not easily ignored, even by an old warhorse like Daffodil. Also, they are finally beginning to feel nervous about Hellebore's machinations, whatever they say. They have heard the rumors of the terrible child. They know that such a thing only comes about by the application of a hideous science, by the study and practice of many forbidden things. You are a pawn, but until we know more, an important one. They will not give you up as easily as you fear. Somehow, that doesn't make me feel a whole lot better. Now, Hollyhock laughed. He was quite likable for the master of a flower house. Theo didn't know if that should make him suspicious or not. In any case, his suspicion sensors were beginning to fatigue from overuse. I've arranged for you to watch the whole thing from a safe part of the conference center, the Fairy Lord said. You will not even be on the same floor of the building as Hellebore and his contingent. Come along, it's almost time for the show. I'll lead you to your seat. Theo stood. Is there a way I can find someone who's staying here? It's Applecore, the sprite who got me here. She went off a while ago, and I'm beginning to get a bit worried about her. I will pass a message to the Hob, said Hollyhock, leading him toward the door. I am sure your friend will be found quickly. You are an important guest, after all, however it must sometimes seem. And since that ends a section... Oh, it's only 7:57. I can read a little bit more. But it's going to be a long section if I read it. No, I apologize. I think I'm going to have to cut it off straight right here because it then goes into a long and extended sequence that I don't want to get partway into and have to stop. So forgive me for that and trust my fading, enfeebled, but still weakly firing authorial intelligence that it would be better to wait until next time to read the next few pages, because it'll go straight into, that's kind of a thing. Anyway, so, but I still have a couple of more minutes, so we will just hang out here for those who want to, and I will have a sip of something, because I still have cat dander in the back of my throat. A dog dander, excuse me. Cat dander is down here, which is why I have a fan down here. I should have a fan upstairs. Our house is basically dander. Really, it's dander with a roof. That's how we live. And fortunately, it's none of us are allergic to dog hair specifically, but two of our young people are allergic to cat hair, so they don't even come downstairs, because downstairs is where Lily, the cat, lives. So it's convenient. I mean, it's true. It's real. They do have that particular allergy, but it's always convenient because I'm like, it's time to clip the cat's crooked nail. Who's going to help me? And of course, they're all like, oh, sorry, Dad, can't do it. Like total allergy thing. Not that there are not others who will not help. Daughter Devin and other young person Max often come in and help me with it. So, but anyway, so yeah, excuse me, I'm very itchy and because also Frank the Chihuahua, whose habits are many and are extremely horrifying, and I won't relate them to you. But one of his nice things, or one of his cute things, is he's a very, very good sleeping in the bed with you Chihuahua, because he's kind of little and slightly tubby, and he's very pliable when he's sleeping. You can just like he worms his way in. He'll kind of twist his way into your armpit or under your chin or something like that because he likes to be warm. But if it gets to be too much, you just sort of grab him and you put him somewhere else, and he just goes like a beanbag. It's rather charming. And then just quietly, just like a little slug or something, he just kind of, without even opening his eyes, he'll just wiggle his way back into some kind of contact with one of the people in the bed, usually Deb and me. Although sometimes the whole family piles in to watch movies or something, or when I refuse to get up and everybody's expecting me to do the dinner planning or something, and I'll just go, well, I ain't getting out of bed to do it. I'm having a perfectly good time here, so you all come in here. So anyway, I don't know why I'm going off on that. Oh, just explaining why I'm having so much trouble and keep sniffling and snorfling, because I've got stuff in my nose. Anyway, so I'm Lord Dandelion. I'm definitely Lord Seed Pods tonight or something. It feels like I've got dandelion fluff up my nose. Anyway, I've said that like 9 times. So at this point, I'm going to wrap things up. I thank you for indulging me. I'm sorry to cut off a little bit before the top of the hour, but it's the end of a section, and then the next section gets to be happening pretty quickly, and it would be hard to cut it off after that. So that's what I'm doing. And we will be starting that section, which is the really long roller coaster ride. We'll be starting that next week with our Sunday early morning, 2 a.m. my time, to be there for the overseas crowd. And then again, of course, this slot. Excuse me, it's the ex-DJ in me, but this slot, and it will be at 7 p.m. And both of those things will be happening. Anyway, so I want to thank you again, all of you, so much. And it's a great pleasure to be able to share this stuff with you. It's a great pleasure to be able to read my own books, where at least I know sort of what's going to happen, so I can do a little planning for voices and dialects and stuff as I go. Whereas, if I was just picking something up at random, I'd be reading Gone with the Wind and going, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. Oh shit, I picked the wrong voice. So because you don't know ahead of time what the character's going to do unless it's your book and you've actually read it before or written it or something. So anyway, much affection from our house to your house. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your loved ones, your friends and neighbors, and anybody else you can find who needs some help. These are tough times, both in a real deep and dramatic sense of people hungry, people broke, all that kind of stuff, but also just in the sense of people just being absolutely cabin fevered, with not being able to have a regular life. Now, that is no excuse for going out like an idiot and partying without a mask on, like so many people. But I am going to try to stay away from scolding and pejoratives, and will only say, I know my friends and readers and the other people who are important to me will know better and will understand why we are doing what we were doing, and will continue to help out with all of that. So be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you next week at 2 a.m. in the morning my time, and whatever time it is your time. And we will continue with War of the Flowers and the many and complicated and utterly meaningless details of pandemic life here at Casa B.L. Williams. So, good night. Be good. Be well. Be happy.